All right. Yes. So welcome everyone. Only thing I say is please keep your mics muted. If you have a question, go ahead and pop it in the chat. We're going to definitely have room for questions at the end, but if it comes up, they may feel like answering it then and there. But yes, I'm really excited for this. We have Key and Jocqueline talking about publishing audiobooks. So Key, Jocqueline, you guys ready?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right. So I'm going to, go on mute myself and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Walter. Hey, everybody. Thanks for showing up. Hi, how y'all doing? Hey. So my name is Key. I go by Key. My full name is Keyonni, and I am an audiobook narrator. And then we have some formal titles on the presentation, but Jacques can go ahead and jump in too.
Good afternoon. It's still morning for me where I am, but good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jocqueline. I go by Jock. So we like to abbreviate or shorten everything to make it easy for everybody. So if you ever look at my name and say, I don't remember what she said, Jock is fine, or just Jay. I will answer to both. Everything but Jackie. I'll answer to everything but Jackie. Is this our formal introduction? Okay, so that's all we need. We'll just stop there for now.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share screen and go ahead and go into presentation mode. So if you have joined this session, you're interested in publishing an audiobook. And so we're going to talk about what you need to know. So again, my name is Keyonni, but I go by Key, and I'm an audiobook narrator. And I also created Voices of Color in Audiobooks, which is essentially a group of audiobook narrators of color who kind of come together and share information and resources. We host discussions on Clubhouse, and I also have a blog on my website. And so hoping to kind of grow that platform as well a little bit more. So that's a little bit about me. And Jock, go ahead, take it over.
All right. Well, again, everybody knows my name now, like we're at Cheers. I am the owner of the Audioflow. I started the Audioflow back in 2017 as just a casting service for authors, and then it branched into audiobook production and publishing. As you can read there in that nice, beautiful bio there, I am a minority-owned, award-winning company. I have my nice award here. This is a Silvers Award. I take it everywhere. Currently we have 2 imprints. So we have, of course, the Audioflow, which is our parent company. We have 316 Audio and Nubian Audio, which focuses on books and voices from people of color. So that is something that I started last year, and we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary in August. And you'll hear more from me a little later on in the presentation.
I'm just going to go back a little bit and then just kind of talk a little bit more about VOCA. So really our mission is to just engage individuals in the audiobook industry and bring together individuals of color in the audiobook industry to network and share resources, and really look at maybe, the goal also is really just sharing more of our stories, sharing more stories that are our stories, specific to BIPOC communities. So again, like I said, we're doing Clubhouse sessions on every other Sunday at 11. So reach out to me on Instagram or go to my website, which I'll share later on today if you're interested in joining one of those conversations. So our discussion today is really going to talk about, we have some objectives here. We want you to kind of understand the audiobook market, right? And understand where there's some growth happening. We want you to really be thinking about what to consider when publishing an audiobook. It's not an easy decision to make, so we'll bring together, we have a lot of information to share with you. Understanding the costs, what a budget would look like. Understanding the audiobook process. You'll learn a little bit about
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
If you could mute yourself, please, that would be great. You'll learn about key distributors and royalties by distributor, and then you'll learn some key things to consider when to narrate a successful audiobook project. So I just want to make sure everybody kind of stays muted. We will, if you have a question as we go through the presentation, drop it in the chat. And then we will also open it up for questions at the end as well. I think we have to designate about 15 minutes for questions. So you can drop it in the chat or you can save it for later. So I know some of you are here, and if you're here, you probably know what an audiobook is. But if you don't, here's a more formal definition. Basically a recording of a book or magazine read out loud. Typically, we're seeing most of our audiobooks being distributed in a digital format. In the very beginning of the industry, a lot of audiobooks were on CD. I think I remember the first audiobook that I listened to, I got it from the library, and it was like a pack of 6 discs. And then I had a CD player in my car, and I was driving to South Carolina. And that's how I consumed my audiobook at that time. But we've moved more towards a digital market and platform. So you're probably going to be streaming, listening to them digitally at this point through some type of streaming service or downloading it. Is there anything you want to add to that, Jack?
No, not at this point, but I did get asked by somebody if they could put their book on vinyl, and I said it cost you more money to do that than actually getting it narrated. So yeah, you won't see too many of those unless it's like a collector or it's a very, very, very short story. But there are still companies that print those vinyls. Hopefully nobody here wants one of those.
That is new for me because I didn't even know. So what do we know about the audiobook market? So this data that I am sharing here is coming from an annual survey that's published by the Audiobook Publishers Association. So the Audiobook Publishers Association, they annually conduct a consumer survey, a consumer study survey, and a sales survey. And so this data is from 2020. And basically, the APA is a industry nonprofit trade association, which is really geared towards audiobook publishers, and also Oh, thank you for muting yourself. So really advocating for the common and collective business interests of audio publishers. So they provide networking opportunities, educational sessions, information forums to their members. And then they host annually the Audio Awards. And the Audio Awards is really the premier award that an audiobook narrator could actually receive in the industry. And I think the submissions have opened up at this point now for applications have opened up for submissions of a talent. So again, this is where this data is coming from. And so what we know from this data is that we are continuing to see double-digit growth in audiobook revenue. In 2020, we saw that revenue increase by 12% to $1.3 billion. And we're going to continue to see double-digit growth, at least it's projected until 2027. We did see some shifts in terms of where people are listening to audiobooks. So as I mentioned earlier, I started out listening to audiobooks in my commute to, traveling out of town. And then, of course, that's changed. A lot of times people were listening in their cars, but now more than ever, people are listening in their homes using their smart speakers. Some of that is probably related to the pandemic orders, of course. Trying to find a way to stay busy and occupy your mind. So there was a huge shift in terms of listener behavior. Also worth noting is that 67% of audiobook consumers agree that, one of the primary reasons that they listen to audiobooks is to reduce screen time. And we also seen some shifts in terms of demographics of consumers. So children 17 and younger are starting to listen to audiobooks, which creates a whole new market of opportunity for authors as well. So that's something to kind of think about as we move through this presentation. So that number went up to 49% from 35% last year in 2019. The data also shows that 71,000 audiobooks were published in 2020, and that's the highest number of audiobooks published on record. So that's a lot of demand. That's a lot of audiobooks being published. And as I said, the data is showing us that there's just continued growth in this industry, which is really exciting and promising. We're still continuing to see that the most popular genres are mysteries, thrillers, and suspense, and then romance as well. We're seeing some more growth as well in self-help and nonfiction. So nonfiction drama genres in the areas of self-help and business. So that was a lot. And I see, and I want Jack to jump in if I missed anything or if there's something you want to add.
I don't think you missed anything. I would say that for a while, everybody would say that romance was the most popular audiobook genre. I still think that's partially true. It just depends on where you capture the data from. I believe that self-help and business genres increased in 2020 because of the pandemic. A lot of people were looking to start their own businesses, kind of reevaluate, what was going on in their lives. It's self-help as well, because a lot of people were dealing just with things with the pandemic, grief, depression, etc. So people in the market, publishers and authors, decided this was a good time to share those stories. So that's why you see a particular uptick in that. So if you write any of those genres, those are equally as important to the market and the industry. So definitely keep that in mind.
And also keep in mind, that in terms of the shift in demographics as well. So again, like children under the age of 17, children 17 and younger are starting to listen more to audiobooks. What we don't know about the market. So this is, a big issue for me. We do not know the consumption habits in terms of real concrete data, right? Real concrete data, we don't have that in terms of consumption habits of BIPOC communities. And so, what are Black folks listening to? What genres are they listening to? We don't necessarily have real concrete data on that. Also sales data on BIPOC titles, we don't necessarily have real concrete data on that as well. And so there's an opportunity there. And I think it's important for us in this room to know that that data is really important if you're an indie author or if you're an indie producer, audiobook producer, because you need to have some data on which to make a real decision in terms of the investment that you're making. And so that's why, to me, that is very important. When I did go online to look at the top 100 audiobooks sold on Audible, the BIPOC genres that I did see come up most often were romance, contemporary Black fiction, thriller, suspense, and then biographies, most specifically the Obama biographies. So those are in the top 100 in terms of what we're seeing. Is there any, jump in there at all, Jock, and add to that at all?
No, I think that that information is accurate. You'll also find, if any of you are actual Audible listeners, because Audible is the largest retailer for audiobooks. And if you go in and just do a search under African American, just as a general search, now Audible has millions of audiobooks, and you'll see that we're less than maybe 2%. To maybe 3%, if that. 3% are listed under African American, and that's across all genres. So again, this is a industry and a market that we're missing out on, and we really should, do our best to move our stories into audio.
I'm going to jump over to some other data. So here's some more data. And this is coming from Findaway Voices. And Findaway is a audiobook production and casting platform. And then they work with key distributors to get audiobooks distributed. And so this is from their 2020 headphones report. And I think what's most important here to know is this is a proprietary survey of their authors. So this is not a very formal kind of data collection process. So they surveyed their authors. So that's just important to keep in mind here. But it does give us a little bit of insight into some more smaller niche genres and where there's opportunity for growth. So in terms of, from last year, from not last year, but from 2019. And again, this is data that was published for the 2020 headphones report. So there was explosive growth in terms of the discrimination and race relations in terms of audiobooks being published, explosive growth. And we all know anecdotally why that happened. The Black Lives Matter movement was on Front Street. And it was in our national narrative for, majority of the year, especially, the death of George Floyd. So I personally have seen so many books on race relations in being published in audio in this past year alone that I have not seen in the past. Another point of note is, this year marks the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa race riots. I think I've seen like 3 audiobooks already that are coming to market on that particular issue. So this is definitely, I feel like we're going to continue to see some trends here I can't predict, how long, but I definitely am not surprised by these numbers. And I think we're going to continue to see some trends here. In terms of some of the nonfiction, we're seeing more in terms of personal finance, audiobooks being published, action and adventure, nature, parenting, and sci-fi. So again, this is proprietary data, but I think it does also help us understand in terms of what are those traditional genres that are selling, which were mysteries, romance, thriller, suspense. We also want to pair these genres with that to have a better understanding in terms of where there's potential for growth and opportunity as an author. And so those are some things to keep in mind. So you may be asking yourself, depending upon why you're here, why should I consider publishing my book as an audiobook? So, I think the numbers to this point that we've reviewed clearly indicate that there's, a lot of growth in this industry. The global audiobook market is valued at close to $3 billion, was valued at close to $3 billion in 2019. And we're going to continue again to see some double-digit growth up until 2027. Audiobooks increase your visibility in a market that's already saturated by digital media. It elevates your game in the publishing industry. It opens your world to new opportunities to network. Another reason why you should consider publishing your book as an audiobook is there is a key difference between ebook and print readers and audiobook listeners. There's a huge difference in terms of the consumption habits by those particular modalities. Those who listen to audiobooks, a lot of the motivation behind it is really listening for relaxation, listening for entertainment, looking for a way to consume, information in a short period of time, i.e. self-help, nonfiction, just don't have the time, So those are some of the key reasons why people are listening to audiobooks. And so again, the motivation differs by modality. So you have to kind of think about that. Audiobooks are not just for entertainment, but they're also for people who have visual impairments or other disabilities that prohibit their ability to read. I know for one, those books open up doors. They act as a window to the world for individuals who are sight impaired. I actually started my narration career as a with the radio reading service. And so we read for the blind. I read live on an AM station at my local radio. And I'm reading, I started reading newspaper articles and books on that service. And that's a national service that's offered. And so, there's a need for audiobooks that also, because they also provide a service for these individuals as well. Short and sweet, audiobooks can be looked at as another stream of income for you if you're an author already and you're, published in ebooks or print. Again, as we mentioned earlier, the kids segment is anticipated to see some expansive growth up until 2027, the projected forecast period. And so that represents a whole new market of opportunity for people of color, targeting kids of color in the audiobook space. And I want Jack to jump in here because I know she has the Youth in the Booth project. And you can go ahead and talk about that really quickly because I think that's pretty relevant here.
So I've always been a big fan of what I can do to try to teach others about how to take their talent and use them in other places. So in 2020, I started Youth in the Booth, which is a nonprofit that teaches audiobook narration to teens, ages 13 to 17, where they have an opportunity to voice stories for children's books, middle grade, and young adult stories. We just graduated 6 youth for this year. We did 7 our first year, and we'll be looking to have another class sometime this summer, probably July. And what I loved about that, the diversity of it. So many youth from different backgrounds who had theater backgrounds and wasn't able to do that during the pandemic was able to use those transferable skills into audio. And so that's just another thing that we try to implement and, show other youth that, hey, I did this book so that you can hear it. We also partner with Learning Ally, which is a company that provides audio for young learners with learning disabilities and visual impairments, and also another nonprofit organization called Imagination Audiobooks, which does video books, and they also use interpreters for those videos as well. So again, this market is not just about, I want to listen to a great book. There's so many other people that you can potentially reach with your story who wants to have a chance to be able to enjoy it as well.
And I will say that my daughter, my 12-year-old, was one of her graduates for this year in Youth in the Booth. And, it really boosted her self-esteem. And she really thought she was on the verge of becoming an audiobook narrator. I was like, let me coach you first. I got to coach you.
She got a great in-house coach. And again, we give a lot of the basics, and some of the things that they got in that course is a lot of things that you would get if you were an adult. You're getting those basics about vocal exercises, about how to make sure you take care of your voice, how to prep script, etc. So we just give the foundation, and then mom can take over. And then we give them projects and pair them with other people looking for voices of that age group. So it's a great project.
Amazing work. I also think it's worth noting that while we've seen most of I don't want to say we've seen most. It's worth noting that the U.S. dominates most of the audiobook market in terms of revenue, and we're seeing some growth in Asian markets as well. However, the Middle East and Africa is actually poised to engage in this market in a competitive way as well. And it's projected that we will probably see most of the growth happen in the next 7 years within the Middle East and African markets. And I know that's personally is a passion of mine, is, networking with those of the African diaspora, working with those in West Africa or South Africa, in nurturing talent and helping to create a platform there. That's a huge personal passion of mine. There are a couple of audiobook apps that are on Google Play that are available in West Africa, particularly in Ghana. One is called Bib, which is Africa's audio library. And then the other one is called African Echoes. And so, there's opportunity there, and there's folks wanting to do this there. And in particular, I think about Nigeria, where they have a very, very rich literary history. And there's so much opportunity for those books to be published as audiobooks. But, there's still barriers in terms of, technological infrastructure. But I have faith, that they'll catch up. So I just want to put that in your ear as something to be thinking about as well. If you are, someone on this call that, may have connections, or maybe, I'm kind of tripping over my words, but I think that's just something to note. And then again, last but not least, audiobooks are easily and readily available for the busy consumer. So again, you can stream. I think people should know that you don't just have to have a paid subscription. You can also, stream audiobooks through, like an app that's available, like Libby or Overdrive. And all that has to do in order to access those audiobooks for free is be connected to your library card. And I know that's how I consumed a lot of my audiobooks very early on, is just by streaming them through one of those apps on my library with my library card. So I don't know if there's anything else. Jock, do you want to jump in?
No, you're doing a great job. I was in the chat, so I'm
Okay.
answering the questions while you're doing that part. So
All right, sounds good. I'll keep on moving. So last but not least, why should I consider publishing my book as an audiobook? Why? Because our stories matter, right? So one of my favorite quotes is by author Isabel Allende, and she's a Chilean writer. And she reminds me of the importance of documenting our stories. And so her quote is there, write what should not be forgotten. And so what I did is I bastardized that quote and I added to it. And my version is document what should not be forgotten, film what not should be forgotten, and speak what should not be forgotten. We have a beautiful culture as a people, and it is very rich, and it should be preserved. And what better way than to preserve some of our dialect, some of our cultural nuances, than in an audiobook format. So our stories matter, and that's another reason why you should consider publishing your book as an audiobook. So I'm going to jump in and talk about some things that you should be considering when deciding to publish as an audiobook narrator. Number one, does your book have graphs and charts? Do they have writing prompts, devotional activities, pictures? If your book has any of those elements, you're going to want to rethink your manuscript and make sure that it is written in a way such that that information can be either narrated or made available as a PDF supplement, as a download when someone purchases the audiobook. One of my very first audiobooks that I narrated was a book on insurance. It's called The End of Insurance as We Know It. And there were a lot of graphs in that audiobook. The author was a male. And so I was having to narrate from his point of view. as a woman, which was really odd, but we both were new to this process. So it was like, hey, we'll learn as we go. But there were a lot of graphs and bulleted kind of lists in that audiobook and charts. And so what he had to do is essentially take that content and make it as a supplemental PDF that was downloadable. And so that's something that you'll want to think about as an option if you have some of that content in your book in that way. Pictures, notorious. If you have a book about a lot of pictures, but a lot of text as well, you have to kind of think about that, because those are things that you can't necessarily narrate, especially if you're referencing a picture, referencing a graph or a chart in your book. That's hard to translate into an audiobook. Is your book a journal, a play, poetry? So I've seen a lot of poetry audiobooks or audiobooks that were that are poetry. And one thing that I think about, and I know when I attempted to narrate those projects is, how does the author want that information to be delivered? I think that's something that you really need to be thinking about as an author. If it's a book of poetry, what do you expect in terms of delivery and being able to communicate that to the narrator? I think when I go to spoken word events, a lot of times the way people read their poetry is very dynamic and engaging and animated. And then some people are pretty subtle. So you have to kind of think about how your poetry would translate in an audiobook, and you got to work with your narrator on that. Another one is if your book is a play. So I don't know if you all know, but you should. If you don't, you should. The Korea poem titled For Color Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough, written by Ntozake Shange. So, in that book, it's a play, it's a Korea poem play, and there are literally I think 5 characters there. And when I was doing some research online, I noticed that when that book was published as an audiobook, they had one actor, and she's a very famous actor actually, narrate that book. And the reviews were horrible because readers were really upset that they chose one narrator to narrate a book that had multiple cast members in it, that cast multiple parts in the book. And so, that's something that you want to kind of keep in mind. Is it fit in that way to be published as an audiobook? Does your book have a family tree or a genealogy chart at the beginning or somewhere at all in the entire book? You have to think about, how is that information going to be translated? How should the narrator translate that book? Or you're going to have to rewrite your manuscript in a way that makes it easier for that narrator to relay that information through narration or through an audio format. Is your book sci-fi, set in an alternative world or region? If so, make sure you have a pronunciation guide or an information sheet available for your narrator. That is super, super important, as well as a character Bible if you have a series. So that kind of helps, the narrator along in terms of keeping, you get a book where there's, especially with sci-fi, a lot of the words could be made up, places are made up. So you're going to have to break all that down for someone in order for them to kind of honor your intent as an author and deliver that work authentically. All right, I'm going to jump to the next slide. Okay. How much is it going to cost me to publish an audiobook? So some things to consider here. There's multiple methods of production to consider. And I'm definitely going to ask Jock to jump in here because there are some things that I may not be as versed in that I know she's going to be versed in as an audiobook producer. But one thing you should know is 9,300 words is equivalent to 1 finished hour. And in this industry, 1 finished hour is essentially the finished. We use the term finished hour as to indicate the length, the finished length of your book. So once the book is said and done and fully recorded, that's how long. That's what the finished rate is. So 9,300 words equals 1 finished hour. And so based upon this particular example of a 50,000 word audio, 50,000 word book, 50,000 word book, if you divide that by 9,300, that tells you how long that book will be in finished hours and minutes. So
And
essentially,
And also remember, that's an estimate. So if you ever work with anybody, they're going to tell you that's an estimated amount. So it's just, some people read a little slower, some people read a little faster. So that last part, that's called your total runtime. So your total runtime is 5 hours and 38 minutes. Lots of lingo, whoever, if you working with a narrator or producer, they'll go over that information. And just in the backup slide, key focused on a lot of things that has to do with like your genre and your manuscript. But what the main thing when I talk to people is, what's your budget? That's like the number one factor in deciding if you're going to produce, if you're going to publish your book, is how much are you willing to invest? So as we go to the next slide that she just, left from, that to me needs to be one of the things that you also need to think about, is how much are you willing to invest? And that will decide what your outcome is going to be with your audiobook.
and I appreciate that, Jock. Thank you for excuse me, clarifying that that's what your total runtime is. And then we do have a slide which kind of attempts to create a faux budget for an audiobook. I think maybe actually after this one. So in terms of production methods, again, there's a few options. You can record yourself at home, right? So I know, there's authors who want to narrate themselves, but it's important to keep in mind, you're going to come out of your pocket on some costs. You're going to have to make sure that you have a microphone. You're going to need a pop filter. You're going to need an interface. You're going to need a microphone stand. You're going to need headphones. You're going to need recording software. And you're going to need to be in a room that's treated for sound reduction. And so, folks do that in a lot of different ways, but those are the key factors that you're going to want to consider. And what this does not account for is the amount of time that it's going to take you to actually narrate that book. Typically, the standard is like if you're new to narration, the amount of time it would take is a ratio of 3 to 1. So 3 hours of recording for 1 hour of finished recorded book. Because there's a lot of stopping and starting. There's a lot of going back. There's a lot of corrections that have to be made. If you don't know how to do punch and roll, that could definitely eat up a lot of your time. So there's a lot to consider there. Okay, so another method is in studio. So let's say, for instance, you say, well, I don't have the space at home to do it. I'm going to go into a studio. Well, if you do go into a studio, you're going to probably have access to the recording software. You're going to have the mic. You're going to have the sound treated room. You're going to have the pop filter, the interface, da 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 da. But you're also going to pay for that studio time. Okay. And again, if you're new to narration and you're not, pretty fast, again, think about that ratio, as I said, 3 to 1. So, if you're paying hourly for studio time, you're going to be paying a lot of money. You can also hire an audiobook narrator who, pretty much it acts as a producer in some ways, in a lot of ways. And that could range from $100 to $400 per finished hour if you hire an audiobook narrator. However, and you should also ask, that narrator, what does that budget include? That's really, really important. Does it include the post-production rate? Does it include your proofing, post-production costs, your proofing costs? And so I have a chart on the next page where we'll talk about that and break that down a little bit more.
Also,
But
just,
again,
sorry to interrupt, but just a quick time check. It's
Okay.
about 1:40. Want to make sure we also have room for questions at the end too, because I know we got a lot of them.
Okay. I will speed it up, and then I think I have maybe 2 more slides left. So again, you could hire a narrator, or you could use a production company. And Jack is most versed on being able to explain what costs would be incorporated into going with a production company. Really quickly, just to look at a typical budget, or not typical, but a proposed budget. So again, looking at your narrator costs, as I said earlier, it could run between $100 to $400 per finished hour for a narrator. I'm using $250 here because that's the SAG-AFTRA rate for a audiobook narrator. And the SAG-AFTRA is a union negotiated rate for narrators in the industry. Not everybody, it's not required that you pay that rate, but if it is a actor who is a part of the union, it's required that they be paid at that base rate. So that's why I added this as the rate here. Post-production. So post-production is going to include your editing, your mastering, and then again, these are very technical terms, but this is the process. So not only are you looking at a budget, but you're getting an understanding of what the process is. So there's post-production, which is after the narrator has finished narrating, there's some raw files and they have to be edited. They have to be mastered. And mastered is a very technical process of just ensuring that there's consistent volume throughout the files. Proofing is going to be a cost as well. And as I said, post-production and proofing may be included in the narrator rate. So you'll want to ask them when you hire a narrator or when you go with a production company. Again, what was I going to say? Proofing. Oh, so proofing is really the process of just listening to the audio recording and making sure that it pairs up with the actual print or the actual manuscript. And, they're looking for mispronounced words, inconsistency in terms, issues in pronunciation, noise, da-da-da-da-da. You're going to have cover art. So you might have a book that uses a rectangular cover art format. Well, for audiobooks, you're going to have like a square cover art image. And so you may have to have that converted. So there's that cost there. And then these are producer fees. So if you're going with a production company, there's probably going to be some producer fees there, which may vary. And then director fees, I put that as optional. I don't know. A lot of the big publishers, and not even a lot of them, some big publishers will use a director. If you're an indie narrator or an indie audio book producer, I don't know that we're incorporating the services of a director. And then you just think about what your distribution and royalty fees are going to be. And so when we pull that all together, we're looking at, for a 5.5-hour book, a very, very rough estimate of about $2,100. Okay. So I'm going to jump over here and, I had a lot of slides, but we got to stop in a few. I'm going to do this one in 1 minute. What you're looking at here is a slide which kind of lays out distribution options. So let's say, for instance, you're wanting to go wide, meaning you're not going to be exclusive to any particular distributor. And so what this slide kind of lays out for you is based upon that production platform or distribution platform where you can expect to see your audiobook being sold at. And so I'm just going to use one example here, which is Findaway, which is the third column over. And so again, as I said earlier, Findaway is essentially production, casting, and then they work with these distributors to get your book distributed. And Findaway is going to is going to give the author a 80% royalty rate, right? So 80% of the author will get 80% of the royalties paid to Findaway. However, if you are distributed on, let's say, ACX, which is through ACX, which you'll find that your audiobook would be on Audible, Amazon, or iTunes, they're going to pay you 25% on each unit sale. So you'll get 25% of each unit sale. So what you can expect as a revenue from your sales on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes for a $10 book would be 80%. You would get 80% as a royalty rate of that 25% per unit sale that ACX would be giving that distributor. And then so the same kind of formula repeats itself. If you're going to sell a la carte on maybe Google, Kobo, or Nook, they're going to offer a 40 to 50% they're going to give you 40 to 50% of that sale on that unit. And then you're going to get 80% of that sale. I mean, you're going to get 80% in your as a royalty of that sale. And then again, with, if you're going through credit or subscription services, so if your book is being distributed on Overdrive, Scribd, or Playster, they're going to give you 30 to 40% for every unit sold. And then you would get 80% of that unit of that 30 to 40%. And then, so this chart just goes on to talk about which platforms are exclusive. Is there a cost to distribute with this service? Are production services offered on this platform? What is the cost per finished hour? How long does it take for the audiobook to be produced? What does the author have control over the price of the audiobook? So it's kind of laid out here. For some, platforms, yes, and then for some, no. And then what kind of support is offered? So we did have a few more slides, which we were talking about just kind of some tips for success, but I do want to take a break and just stop talking so that we can answer some questions really quickly. A lot of these tips are pretty helpful, but I think the meat of everything has been presented to you. So I'm going to go ahead and stop talking, and then I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know that Jocqueline actually has been like a chat warrior answering everyone's questions in there. So thank you very much for that. I think a lot of the questions were asked, but if anyone has any other questions, the floor is yours one at a time. We could also type in the chat because, sometimes just asking a question in front of everyone could be a little intimidating. We don't have a ton of time, but if you do have a quick question, floor is yours. You could always email our speakers afterwards as well.
Absolutely. Please feel free.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you guys for doing this session. I've never actually seen a session on this, like not ever for audiobook creation. And I was like, oh, interesting. And I see that there's substantial growth. I see the cost, but I just think that, like when you get to that level and you can invest, it's worthwhile because, just because people are differently able, you want to have, I guess, as many, ways to share their stories as possible. So just thank you for the session.
Thank you.
I always tell people it is an investment, but depending on your purpose or reason for going into audio, there's ways to have it done. Depending, if you want to keep your rights, you can also sell your rights so that your book is done, so that you're getting royalties after you receive your advance. So it's very similar to if you work with a publisher. I know for my company, we do payment plans. So once you receive information about the cost, we work on how much, you need. It's kind of like layaway. Yes, you can lay away your audiobook. So, just be sure that you sit down and count the cost and see, what your timeline is, the purpose of why you're doing the audiobook, and then find someone to connect with that wants to take your story and have it be as successful and a part of them as it is for you. That's my favorite tip.
I agree. It's definitely a relationship. It's a relationship, and you're in a relationship with this individual for some time. So I agree with that.
Can both of you guys type your emails into the chat as well?
Hello, I have a question. Hi,
Hey.
I typed it in the beginning of the chat, so it probably got lost, but I am so intrigued. I was listening to this. I joined this because I wanted to find out about my own book being made into an audiobook, but I was interested in children's literature. I've always loved reading children's stories, and I was asking about a space for that because I've written a children's nonfiction work, but I really enjoy reading stories to children, and I was always looking to get into something like that. So where does this space fit? Where does that fit in this space is my question, how to get started with that. Thank you.
Jack, you want to take that one?
Well, you're the narrator, so nobody wants to hear me read anything.
So, okay. So what I hear you saying, Danita?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so you're interested in narration is what you're saying, or narrating your own audiobook, what you've written already?
Not my own, just anyone like Black children's literature
Okay.
or just children's literature. I love reading stories to kids. I guess it's my first grade teaching experience from way, way back that I still like to do. So
No, I think I completely identify with that. I started reading with my kids' second grade classroom, and I fell in love with all the performance aspects of it. And I was like, oh, but this was years ago, so I didn't think about it seriously. I know my journey has been such that, you know, I really started doing a little bit of research in the industry and just trying to understand the ins and outs of it. And I did that really primarily, you know, I took a class here and there at my local community college on audiobook narration. And that doesn't always happen. Those are not always available. But again, as I said earlier, I started volunteering just to read aloud in whatever capacity I could. If you have a local radio station, they may have a reading service for the blind. There's Learning Ally, there's LibriVox, that allows you to kind of, and I'm not sure exactly, but Jack can speak to Learning Ally and LibriVox and how they work. I don't know if they do new narrators, how new you are, you know, how new they'll take you. But
so I know that according to Andy, we aren't doing LibriVox anymore because
oh yes,
people were taking them and selling your work on Audible and making money. So don't do that. But Learning Ally, you do have to have a home studio. So you would record in your home studio and then you would, you know, submit. So a lot of those companies do require that you have some type of the right technical aesthetic at your home. However, if you want to do this and just start and see if you like it, you know, you enjoy doing this. It doesn't necessarily have to be an audiobook or anything. Definitely libraries, like he said, they have virtual events until, you know, the space opens back up. Try United Through Reading, which works directly with military families and kids. You might want to see what they might have available. I did some work for them a couple years ago. Just kind of Google online what it is that you can do to share stories with kids. Even if you took I mean, it's not for sale, so you can still read a book, or even if it's a public domain book and you want to post it on your website or on your social media and say, hey, I really wanted to share this story with kids in the community, and you're going to read it and you post it out, and you're doing more of those, so you're getting comfortable with just sharing those stories. Then if you decide you want to go and do something else later, you've got a portfolio already. So, you know, those are some things you can look at as well.
And then I also want to jump in and, you know, I think we're telling you a lot of steps. Really, to be honest with you, as I mentioned earlier, I am, you know, curating the Voices of Color in Audiobooks. It's a Clubhouse group. If you're on Clubhouse, follow me, find me, and then jump into those sessions. You will meet tons of audiobook narrators on Clubhouse in those audiobook groups. And you know, we will get you connected. You will get connected to the right people. You'll learn who you should start coaching with. You'll learn what steps you need to take to start getting your home booth in order. Because I literally am in my closet, but it's treated. It's a treated closet for not soundproofing, but sound reduction. And so, you know, it sounds like we're giving you this whole story about how to get started. But connect with folks that are in the industry, like myself, like Jock. I think Kyla is on here, Kyla Fry. She's also a narrator. Connecting with us and then sharing resources. We'll share resources with you. It's a great community. We're always sharing resources and information with each other. So reach out to me.
All right. Thank
Thank
you
you so
both
much.
so much. I really hate to do this because like I feel like we could have like a whole like Black audiobook weekend, but there is another event that's about to start soon and they have to
Okay.
start prepping. But one question is that slide, is that accessible to everyone?
I can get the slides. I don't know who I can get them to, Walter, but I can share the slides. I don't know
Okay,
who to send them
yeah, I
to.
could reach out to you. And what I was going to say is we have a Discord group. If you guys are not yet in there, I just posted the invite link to the chat. It's like the official Discord group for this event. So I think we're creating a resources channel there. So
Okay.
once it's created, either you could share it there or I can make sure it's added there too. But yeah, I'll reach out to you guys right after this.
Okay, so I'll definitely try to share it on Discord and then reach out to me and I can send it to you personally and then I'll share it with AAMBC as well.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Let her know that we need to do this again.
Oh, yes, we do. We do. Because
Let
I
her
know
know.
people have more questions. But yes, thank you both for your time. Thank you all for joining. Definitely check out everything else that's happening because this is not the end. It's basically just getting started if you're in Atlanta or virtual. But yes, thank you all. And definitely get in the Discord chat and hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Happy Friday. It's the weekend.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye,
take care,
everybody.
everyone.